On est très heureux de vous accueillir aujourd'hui pour cette nouvelle exposition Stephen Shore. On est très heureux d'accueillir Stephen Shore qui est venu spécialement de New York pour l'ouverture de cette exposition et d'accueillir également Quentin Bajac, le directeur du Jeu de Paume à Paris, qui a mené il y a quelques années, qui a été le commissaire il y a quelques années d'une très belle rétrospective Stephen Shore au MoMA de New York. Et ils vont tous les deux s'entretenir pendant à peu près 45 minutes du travail de Stephen Shore et de ce qui est présenté dans cette exposition. La séance sera suivie d'une série de dédicaces. Nous avons la grande chance d'avoir un magnifique catalogue réalisé par Atelier EXB. On remercie les éditions EXB d'être présents parmi nous ce soir et d'avoir vraiment réalisé un ouvrage de tout premier plan. Avant de céder la parole à Quentin et à Stephen pour cette discussion, je voudrais juste dire un mot sur cette exposition pour vous dire qu'il s'agit d'une rétrospective de Stephen Shore. Ça fait assez longtemps qu'on n'avait pas eu une rétrospective de Stephen Shore à Paris. Et je suis particulièrement heureux que ce soit à la fois une rétrospective, puisqu'on couvre à peu près 50 années du travail de Stephen Shore, mais en même temps, c'est une rétrospective avec un angle particulier, puisque la quasi-totalité des photographies qui sont présentées dans cette exposition sont faites à l'aide d'un outil de locomotion, les images qui sont produites parce qu'on peut se déplacer en voiture, parce qu'on peut se déplacer en train, en avion ou utiliser un drone. Et c'est à travers ce prisme-là, cet angle-là, qu'on a organisé cette rétrospective qui, je crois, donne à voir différemment le travail de Stephen Shore. Voilà, donc je leur cède immédiatement la parole. On va les laisser discuter pendant à peu près 45 minutes et puis ensuite on accueillera quelques questions dans la salle avant de passer à la signature. Voilà, je vous souhaite un bon entretien. Stephen and Quentin, the mic is yours.
Merci Clément. So, good afternoon, Stephen.
Hi, Quentin.
It's very nice to have you here and very unexpected to see you with all these people this afternoon. So we're going to have, as Clément was just saying, let's say a 45 minutes discussion. And then there will be, I'm sure, many questions from the audience, as always with you. And then a book signing, I think, I'm sure. And then we'll probably try to focus during this conversation on the topic of this show. That is both the notions of a vernacular and vehicular. So we already had a small discussion before, and I know that both these notions of vernacular and vehicular come more from Clément than from you, as these are two of Clément's many obsessions, vernacular and vehicular. But yet, the notion of vernacular is often associated with your work, and by critics and by you. But the notion of vehicular far less frequently. So maybe we should start with this.
Well, I think for me it starts with road trips. And I grew up in New York City, and most of I didn't have a car when I was young. Most of my traveling was really to some East Coast cities into Europe, and hadn't seen the middle of America. And by the late 60s, developed a group of friends in New York City who all came from Amarillo, Texas, and every summer went back to their homes there. And I started going back with them and discovered part of the country that was the way of life was so different. The landscape, the light, just the way they lived was so different, and it was I loved it and wanted to explore the country, and so got a driver's license, rented a car, and started driving, and on trips of exploration to take photographs. And the first trip was the real photographic trip was that series over there, American Surfaces. And when I started, my idea was to have a photographic diary of my trip, and recorded every meal I ate, every person I met, every bed I slept in, every television I watched, every toilet I used, every town I went through, the residential architecture and commercial architecture. So it was a series of series. That's how it started. What I wasn't expecting was I found that after a few days of driving, of paying attention to the road constantly for hours, it changed my state of mind, that my mind became very quiet, very focused, very clear, and kind of entered a flow state, and that the act of driving somehow put me into that state, and which would last the whole trip. And that's how I started really finding road trips exciting. Also, it's just the experience of having not driven when I was young, to know that I can get into a car, go any direction I want for as long as I want. It was a different kind of freedom.
So it seems that the car puts you in motion and then puts the photographic act also in motion.
Yes.
But I can even think of one work that comes before the car, which is one of your very early work that connects in a way vernacular and vehicular, which is not a photo, but a film, which is something that you did in '64 in an elevator, which is in fact, I think, the first image where there's that, or the first work, where there's that connection between a kind of photographic, even if it's a filmic process,
yes,
and motion, and automated motion.
Yes. I hadn't thought it. You're right.
I remember this because when we did the show together at MoMA, that was the first piece that you could see when entering the first room. And that was for me, a way of also of putting into motion the show and your work.
Yes. So just for everyone here, for background, it's a 16 millimeter black and white film I made that was shot inside of an old cage elevator where you have them here all the time, a lot, right?
Yeah.
And the entire film is the elevator in motion, looking through the cage of the elevator inside of the cage of the elevator shaft.
So here in the exhibition, we have in the first room this series of images that you took from the car in '69 in LA. Were you at that time aware of other photographic experience that had been made at the same time? I'm thinking of John Baldessari's trucks, every truck.
Yes.
I'm thinking also of Joel Meyerowitz's European trip that was shown at MoMA in '68.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that at the time. But I was looking more at the conceptual artists, and people more along the lines of Baldassari. And so my project then was, I had a couple of things in mind. One was to photograph for a day and use every picture I took rather than edit. And the other thing I wanted to explore was I was trying to get away from visual convention in photography, and I had looked at a lot of snapshots that were where mistakes were made, and I thought, what could I learn from a mistake, and try to put that consciously into practice. It's funny you mentioned Baldassari, because about 15 years ago I did a talk with him, and he was talking about the truck series, and I think we had a very similar intention. He said, if I use a concept to define one aspect of the picture, I'm removing some of the decision-making from it. I wanted to get to something more natural, which was exactly my intent in that and some of the conceptual work.
And in a way, it's rather paradox. It's a paradox because you're in a way constructing that photographic method or protocol, or which is a lot of a constraint, in the car.
Yes.
And yet, it is completely open to accident and chance.
Yes.
Could you comment on that?
So what comes to mind is I've known for maybe 15 years or so the man who's the professor at Caltech, who's the head of the computational vision group. He's that computers can recognize things in the world is because of the work he was doing then. And he wanted to track how people paid attention to a picture, I want to rephrase that. He was not interested in how they paid attention to a picture. He was interested how they paid attention to objects within a picture, what they looked at first, how do you recognize a cup, and how do you recognize a spoon? How do you recognize, to take it to a larger point, how do you recognize a pedestrian crossing a street? And he found that photographs that he used, bought from agencies, the problem was the photographer's intent. The photographer's composition made it difficult for him to just use these as the experiment. So he got an engineer at Caltech to devise a tripod head that rotated completely randomly and set up a camera to photograph completely randomly, thinking he would then get around the photographer's intent. And it was a total failure because if you think about random, it's pictures like this. The pictures like just... and so most of the pictures were completely unusable. And then he came across American surfaces and saw that I was photographing a meal, a telephone, and this is just what he wanted. So he started using my pictures. But the connection is that we both were interested in a conceptual approach to try to short circuit or get beyond visual convention, and it didn't exactly work.
So a conceptual approach, which was of course very different from the approach of the generation before you. And I almost have the feeling that you belong to the generation of photographers that in a way reworked street photography. Street photography of the 40s, 50s, 60s was about walking the city. And from the late 60s, it's not about walking, it's about driving. It's not anymore about the city, but it's more about peripheral urban areas. So I have the feeling that, you almost are part of that generation who rethought and in a way rebuilt and re-envisioned a kind of new street photography that would be slightly different.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think it grew out of not rejecting the street photography of people like Gary but it just grew out of the road trips that there was a lot more of America than just the city, and I was out exploring it.
So images that...
By the way, as I was saying that, I'm thinking there's a lot to the random camera. There's a lot more to a room than this or this, that there is all of this.
And doing images, of course, that you can see all around you, and that are, of course, far less narrative. They're not narrative, whereas the images of the generation of the 40s, 50s, early 60s were narrative ones. Images often devoid of people, that focused on road sign architecture, mundane architecture, roadside architecture, etc., etc. And also images that are, in fact, done with your car, but then you stop and they're very static because you use that cumbersome, heavy camera, 4x5 or that 8x10 from 74. So there's a kind of, strange, I would say, dynamic that establishes between going, driving, and then stopping and having something very static.
And not just static, but very, I would say, dramatically intentional.
Mm-hmm.
It's not stopping and taking a snapshot. It's stopping and spending 15 minutes to set up a camera and move a little bit to my left or a little bit back, and
which was, of course, very different from the smaller American surfaces.
Very different.
And so, yeah, sorry I interrupted.
No, but I made the point. Yeah.
Mm. And then also when I have a look at, we will go and talk about signs of life, but when I have also a look at all the images here, you know, you have postcards, you have small prints that are pasted on the walls, you have images that are framed, you have wallpapers. So already at that period, we're in the 70s, you are really rethinking completely the way you wanted to exhibit your photos. And this is something that really struck me when we worked together on the exhibition 6-7 years ago, and that I knew, but that I was not really conscious how often you really reworked and worked on the way you present the photos.
Mm-hmm.
And especially, you know, interested in big images, wall images,
Mm-hmm.
and pasted directly on the
Yes.
wall,
Yes.
as it was initially presented in 71 at Light Gallery.
Yes. 72.
72,
Yeah.
sorry.
Well, it grew out of my interest in snapshots. I wanted them to be seen as physical objects, not as framed, matted works of art, but just as Kodak snapshots. After doing it, I found I became particularly interested in the content of the pictures, and that I wanted that the snapshot was beginning to take away from the picture, that people who came to the show saw a wall of snapshots. And I wanted to explore the content more with a larger print, and found that the film was just not sharp. The Kodacolor at the time couldn't make an 8x10 print. So that's why I got a larger camera. And that I found, to my surprise, I loved using a ground glass, and that if I've weighed myself down with a 4x5 and film holders and using a ground glass and camera on a tripod, I might as well try an 8x10. And so that's what led to this. The which are, have always been a much more traditional presentation. They were always presented over matted and framed. If you look directly behind you, there's, I think, for me personally, one of the most exciting aspects of this exhibition is the recreation of this display that was part of an American bicentennial show in 1976 at the Smithsonian Institution. That was curated by the architects Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown, and I did a lot of work for that exhibition. They commissioned me to do a cross-country trip. Some of the pictures in this show, in fact, were taken on that trip. That picture of the Standard Station over there, a number of others, and the actual installation was larger than this. The prints were 16 by 20 feet. The buildings were life size, and we used a process from Japan called Neko, where the brand name was Neko. The images were scanned, and this is in the 70s, long before personal computers. The images were scanned and printed onto 3-foot wide sheets of paper with airbrush. And so when you got up close, you'd see the airbrush dots, which were very satisfying, and then put up like wallpaper. It was was just a great installation.
And then there's that image that I didn't know, and you mentioned it, doing it with an 8x10 camera within the car, which is rather challenging, probably.
It was very challenging. He was not driving. And these are actually the hands of and the car of a man named Weston Neff, who at the time was curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and had loaned me his 8x10 camera when I made my first 8x10 photographs.
And then in the other rooms, there are the print-on-demand book that you did in the early 2000s.
Yes.
When you did a series of... and so Clément and you selected 3 of them, one done during a train ride, one during a car ride, and one during a plane trip.
Yes.
So what I really like in this small book is that you can really feel that what is important is more the process than the results, the products in a way, than the images. And which strikes me as... I was thinking recently of preparing that discussion about John Couvenhoven. You know John Couvenhoven, the art critic, who was also one of the big influence of John Tarkovsky in terms of, especially around the notion of vernacular. And in one small essay, which is What is American About America, he says, what is American about America is that American people are more focused on the process than the product. And I think that really is something that I can find at the very core of your work. Mm-hmm. The fact that you're setting up all these kind of small protocols, systems, methods, and then you see where it goes. You don't have precise ideas. Yes. And then the image occurs,
yes,
or sometimes it probably doesn't work at all. And so, am I correct in saying that? And then I would be also interested in, when it doesn't work at all, why do you put away an image? Why you say, that doesn't work, I set up my protocol, I had this idea, but then the images are not relevant. So, 2 questions.
Okay. So, yes, I'm more interested in process. And one thing I think about with students is that the more they try to make a good photograph, the more conventional their pictures become. And that to make a good photograph, you have to not want to make one. And that if you just get involved in the process, perhaps if you have some talent or some insight, something interesting will come out. But
which is very American, I'm always surprised, when I was talking to American photographers, how they talk about technique, which is very rarely the case with French photographers, But, often the American photographers bring you back to the technique and to the process, and not the content of the image. But
no, I think that's true. I'm just processing this as you're saying it because I know among friends we do talk about technique because that's practical, and I find I never talk to people about content, and I've somehow gotten away with 40 years of teaching and.
And not talking about content.
And talking about it, I make myself do it because I know. People expect it, students expect it, but most of the time it's technical, it's physical technique and visual technique.
So it's not about metaphysics, but physics.
Yes, I would say, yeah. What was the second question?
The second question was, when do you decide that having built, it doesn't work?
Yeah. So you're really saying if it's about the process, why not show the mistakes? Because it would bore people. I mean, my next book with Mac Books is going to be a book of the print-on-demand books. Mm-hmm. And the work had been published before, by Phaidon in a catalog raisonné of 80 books. And it was in 2 volumes. Each volume was about 1,200 pages.
Mm-hmm.
They had to get an engineer to work out the binding. Each volume is this thick. And it's a facsimile of all the books, and sold for $3,000. And 40 people on the face of the earth have seen it. And so that doesn't solve anything. That was a concept. It was a publisher having a concept.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the books are more interesting than others, and I would rather have the 30 most interesting ones seen by people than the 80 of them not seen.
Yeah. But yet, I'm not sure that you have completely answered the question. I'm trying to rephrase it.
Well, let me answer in a different way.
Well, yeah.
Okay, rephrase it.
When at one point you need to make a judgment, to say,
Yes.
I put aside that image and I definitely decide to either print or
Yes.
to show or in a book or on the wall that image. I know it's a question which is tricky or even probably impossible to answer, but yet at one point in the process there's a kind of aesthetic judgment that
Yes.
it is.
Yes.
Yeah. So what drives you?
Well, I'm not sure I'm going to answer what drives me. I'll answer how I do it, which is
driving force, maybe as a metaphor.
I look at them over and over again, and some hold my interest longer,
Mm-hmm.
and that's my editing process. It's often wrong. I'm now in the process of doing drum scans of every negative I shot for American Surfaces. And it's hard to say that there's any huge qualitative distinction between them.
Mm-hmm.
This is a project that I think a catalog raisonné could happen.
Mm-hmm.
If there was a duller image, it's going to be this size in a book, and you just don't have to look at it. That's different than going through 20 pages of a print-on-demand book that isn't very interesting. But if as I look at the pictures, as you worked with my studio manager Laura, as Laura's been scanning them, it's just totally baffling to me how some of the pictures I'm seeing were not in the book, how they fell through the cracks. Or
this is also why you love doing revised editions.
Yes, I think you're right. Yeah.
So a work in process.
But what I was also going to say is, when I work with, I've been teaching for over 40 years, and at my college, the seniors all work on an independent year-long project, which culminates in an exhibition. And they, of course, this being the finale of their college career, feel a lot of internal pressure to make it good. And one of the first things I tell them is that I would rather they try something they've never done before and fail than go back to their work that looks like the 4x5 work they did 2 years before, that they will safely know they can come up with a good senior show. And they do. I mean, they do try, and I find rarely fail.
So tell us a little about the drone photos.
Yeah.
That are the last part of the show, and that are, as Clément was explaining to me, shown for the first time in Europe, and that are being shown in New York at your gallery right now.
Yes.
So why drones?
So if you look at this picture here, it's the edge of it's the border of a 19th century factory town in New England. Red brick factory buildings are very typical in New England, and you can see exactly where the city ends and the countryside begins. And it's a really very rare to find a spot where from eye level a camera can see that and show it. We can understand it because we can walk around and build a mental image from thousands of different impressions. But a camera can't do that. A camera can only see from one place. And that kind of abutment of one neighborhood becoming another neighborhood, residential becoming industrial, an old residential neighborhood abutting a subdivision, how a river affects the vegetation around it, the human development around it. We understand all that, but it's very hard to find places at eye level that really show it clearly compared to when you're taking off in a plane or just about to land, the first 45 seconds or so, when you're not way up, but you're just hovering over the land, it all is displayed. And that's what the drone allowed me to do it. And then the camera technology improved so much because it can only hold a very small camera. And I can get these prints that are about the size of these Uncommon Places prints, actually a tiny bit larger, that are equally as resolved.
So it's true that aerial photography has a long history.
Yes.
You know, from balloons, from kites, from planes, of course. So how would you say that there's a kind of specificity of drone photos?
Different from the others?
Yeah. In what way are they different, if they are different from the others? Because I think that moving images done by drones are very different, from the others. They have a smooth movement, which you never find in other images.
Yeah.
But I would be interested in hearing you about the specificity of still images.
Yeah, I don't think there's much difference between drone images and balloon images.
Mm-hmm.
I photographed from a plane once in '73 with a Crown Graphic. So we did 4x5 pictures around the suburbs of New York. But it was very limiting in color because I had to shoot at a 500th of a second because of the vibration of the plane. And the plane was made for photography and had a hole in the floor. But within limits, I had control of the framing. I could say, fly over there, and I can move the camera. But what the drone gives me is something that a plane or a balloon can't have with that precision, which is the drone is rock steady in the air. It doesn't move. I've done videos with it, not with the drone moving, with the drone still, and there's no camera movement. I have an exact image on my control panel, and it's like using a camera on a tripod. If I want to move it over, I don't like the framing a little bit, I want to move it over a tiny bit to the right, I move it a tiny bit to the right.
So it's going back to the 8x10 experience.
With a very important difference.
Mm-hmm.
But it has the same degree of control of the image, which I couldn't get from a balloon or a plane. I couldn't move it over 10 feet. I couldn't go sideways. I couldn't say, hold still, I like it like this, just let's move 10 feet to the left in a plane. The difference is, if I'm standing here on a street corner, if I'm standing here taking this picture, and I want more space to the left of this lamppost, I know what's going to happen when I move the camera because I can see what's there. With the drone, I have no idea. The way I work with the drone is I'll see something in front of me that I think has potential. I'll send the drone up. I mean, I can recognize what's going to be interesting and take that picture. But the drone battery lasts 20, 30 minutes, and then I go exploring, and I'll send the drone a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile away. I have no idea where it is. If I move it to the left, I have no absolutely no idea what's going to come into the frame.
And this is exciting.
It is very exciting. It's a very different way of working. I take more pictures. Like this picture behind us, I took one picture.
Mm-hmm.
I decided where I wanted. I took one picture. With the drone, it moves and I think, oh, this looks good, so I'll take a picture because I don't know what's going to happen next. And maybe it'll be better, but maybe it won't be. It's in a way like going into a black room with a flashlight, and wherever you move it, you don't know what's going to be there.
So maybe one last question before the question from the public. I wanted to hear you about, vernacular and vehicular. There's a ghost, which is that of Walker Evans. Vernacular, vehicular, and of course, Clément did that big Walker Evans exhibition at Pompidou a while ago. But if you go back to American photographs, it's a book about car culture, about the importance. One of the many aspects of American photographs is the fact that there's that interest for car culture and the way that car transformed the American landscape. I know how interested or fascinated you are by the work of Walker Evans.
Yes.
Would you say a few words?
Yeah, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, well, there's also the photographs of Western exploration.
Yeah.
Which they didn't have cars, but they were, in their way, they were traveling and exploring. Walker Evans. I don't think of him in terms of road trip.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously he got to these places.
Not of road trip, but the importance of cars.
In pictures, absolutely.
In pictures.
If you photograph, there are streets within a couple of blocks of here that if you didn't have signage in first-story windows and cars, the picture could have been taken by Bajac.
Mm-hmm.
And that cars put a date stamp. They show a particular style, color, a palette. Evans occasionally fucked with us and put in an old car.
They show silly objects from the 20th century, like a phone booth.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
You said you are more interested by process techniques like the contents. So if I understood, but about urban architecture during the 16th and today, do you think they have an implication of your work, and your work have evolved between 60s and today about the architecture, urban architecture?
Do I see an evolution in the architecture, or
if you are interested about
yes,
urban architecture, the aesthetic of
to say that I'm interested in the process doesn't mean that the pictures don't have content. To say that I don't discuss content with the students that much doesn't mean I'm not interested in the content of the picture. I don't like talking about it. The image that comes to mind is sticking a pin in a butterfly. And there's some things that I think are better left analyzed. When I hear over-analysis of content, or when a student says, that spells out their intention, I'm going to photograph injustice. Well, it's very hard to photograph without words. If a student says, I want to photograph every doorway on Rue de l'Archive, that's it. Okay, I'll go with that. That you can show. But I know that we all have unconscious processes, and that maybe artists are more open to their unconscious processes, and that in the work I could be paying attention to, in this picture, the exact framing, exactly where I'm standing, so that the space between the lamppost and the building to its right is just a certain amount, and that the space between, you can't see it here, the lamppost over here and the building to its left is just a certain amount. And I can be paying attention to that. But knowing that there's part of me that's responding to many levels in this whole scene that I don't need to analyze, because I trust that unconscious process. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Stephen.
Yeah.
The standard behind me is
Yes.
always been described by you as a watershed of in the road work. And
Yeah.
I thought it might be good to just explain that to the people here, how that happens to be a watershed in your work.
Okay. So one of the things on my mind as I was using the 8x10 camera was to see how much information I could organize in a picture. Like, how densely packed could I, in this picture I'm talking about the space between the lamppost here and the building and the lamppost there and the building. In that picture, there are dozens of interstices that I'm paying attention to. There's a picture, the middle one on this wall, done about a week later, where it's the same thing. I'm looking at how many different decisions can be held. But when I took that picture, afterward, I'm going to back up a second. To do that, it means I have to impose some kind of structure on the world. The picture is not just random. It's not that random tripod head that goes anywhere. I have to make sense of it by imposing a structure, starting with where the frame goes, where I stand. Photographers have to impose a structure. What we do is sort of the opposite of what a painter does. A painter, I was just reading a book by a man named Adam Moss about the creative process, and it's subtitled Something Out of Nothing. But what he's talking about is what a painter does, or a writer, or a composer. You have a blank piece of paper. You put musical notation down. Photographers do the opposite. We find something out of everything. We simplify by just deciding I'm going to put a frame here and stand there. What I realized was that in trying to organize all the information in this picture, I wasn't as responsive to the structure of the world. I was more interested, I solved it by imposing a visual structure, and that visual structure was very classical. It was basically the same kind of structure that Claude Lorraine would use in, I guess, 17th century painting, with maybe a classical scene with a column near the side that exists in relation to the frame, that sets up the space with one-point perspective. So I was imposing a beautiful classical organization on a 20th century scene. So the next day I went back and to see if I could photograph that same intersection where the structure grew out of my understanding of the cars, the buildings, the signage. and didn't look as imposed. Again, it has to be imposed. It's impossible for it not to be, unless you use the random camera. I will digress a second, Michael. You looked at, I don't know if you've seen it, made a new edition of my memoir where I included a picture taken by my little Shih Tzu, Miss Agnes. There's a camera, a very light digital camera that can go onto a pet's collar, and you can set it to take pictures every minute, every 2 minutes, whatever. And what's in the picture has to do with where she's looking, but she has no idea when the picture is being taken or that a picture is being taken, and has no real control over the framing. So it is, in a way, a random picture. What's interesting about it is that photography is such that it is a complete photograph. She couldn't do a painting, but it's in focus, the exposure is good, it has edges, it has structure. She was not aware of the structure. She has eyes. She is past now, but she had very large black eyes. But the eyes were not controlling the picture in any way. But the picture formally was a complete photograph. But that was, as I said, a digression. So anyway, I went back to the intersection to try to see, can I allow the structure that I'm imposing to grow out more of my experience of the scene rather than a structural solution that I'm imposing on the scene.
And yet, Stephen, it's that image.
Oh, I still love the image.
One that you selected. Not the one done the day after.
The one I selected for what?
For the books.
No, the book has both.
The book has both?
Yes.
The one that became iconic.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
And I like it.
Yes. 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 And I still like the picture. But if you open Uncommon Places, you'll see them on facing spreads.
So sorry, the two images. So the one that becomes iconic,
yes,
is the more classical one.
Yes.
Let's say.
Yes.
What's your reaction to that?
My reaction is the other one is more difficult.
Yeah.
And I think I always, in my classes, give a caveat to the students that I like what many people think of are uninteresting pictures. And so when I pick a picture of theirs that I particularly love, and everyone looks, what? It's because I'm interested in what a photographer brings to it. Mm-hmm. There are some scenes that just call out for a photograph. They say, photograph me. Mm-hmm. You won't go wrong. And I don't see the photographer doing that much in it. And the ones that don't call out. I guess this goes back to the idea of vernacular, that I'm interested in applying focused, clear attention to everyday life. Like, what's it like to live with attention? And to practice that is not to pay attention in dramatic moments, but pay attention to the in-between moments.
Hi. Before you were saying about your process in your the previous part of your photographic career of driving, then stopping, making the frame, taking a picture, then back to the car and driving again. So I would like to know what was at the time, and maybe now that you changed your medium of taking pictures, how long after your shooting you were selecting your pictures?
It depends on the medium. When I was doing my cross-country trips, it would be weeks and weeks afterward. I would send the film. Color film is sensitive to heat. So I would, every few days, send film back to New York for processing. And I wouldn't see the pictures till the end of the trip. So it could be a couple of months. When I'm using a drone, I see it immediately and can select later that day. The print-on-demand books are all done with digital cameras. They're all shot in one day. To get to something Quentin was referring to, the pictures are all made with the book in mind, and so it's never like I'm going out to take my best pictures today and then I'm going to make a book. But I'm thinking about not them as standalone pictures, but how they work, how they're going to work in the book that I know I'm going to make. And then often I make the selection that same day and send it to the printer that day. So it depends on the medium. Digital makes it very different.
Hi, I'm still thinking about your thoughts on process versus content, and what you said about students who are interested in big topics like injustice, and what you might say to a student who's interested in exploring a large topic like that.
I'm smiling because I'm thinking about, I taught a beginning class in the fall, and what I realized was they're not interested in injustice. I was just saying that. What they're interested in is personally more distressing. They wanted to get more likes. I'm being serious. When one of the first assignments I give is to photograph on a walk from your dorm room to the dining commons. So I want them to take a photograph on a walk they take every day, that they're probably listening to music or on their phone or not paying attention, and to actually pay attention along this walk, which is probably not going to see, they're probably not going to run into anything dramatically photographic or interesting. And then knowing my own predilection for uninteresting pictures, I'll pick a picture that I genuinely like that's totally baffling to them because it would get no likes. And then it came out in discussion that they signed up for the class because they wanted more likes. What's wrong with getting likes, they would say. Well, I would say a lot of the best art when it was made didn't get many likes. If a student actually, but I'm going to answer your question seriously, if a student actually wanted to think about injustice, I would say, think about the limitations of the medium of photography. Think how you can go beyond those limitations. I would probably send them to look at the work of Terence Simon and say, how can you combine photographs, words, and documents to convey your intentions?
Hello. Just as a question about photography as a passion, and just following a previous question regarding editing, at what point the emotion you can feel when you take a picture stays in the long term for editing? I mean, when you sent your pictures to New York, you had probably time, and then you have another vision of them because time passed. And but with drones, if you select right away, well, my question is, when you have more feelings regarding one image because you felt really something you found out a street like this one, and you say, okay, this is the good one, and I am bringing really something personal to it. And is there a time when you feel that this personal feeling feels wrong regarding the series you're doing? I don't know if I'm clear, but
Yep. And I'm not sure I'm going to answer it exactly as you're expecting. I don't feel a lot of emotion when I'm taking pictures. Mm-hmm. But what I've discovered for myself is that if an artist, and I think an artist, I say artist, not photographer, an artist in any medium, is in the present when they're working, is, as an athlete would say, in the zone. If they're really existing in the present, there's a taste of that is in the work and stays in the work forever. And that's what I'm looking for.
Do you have any advice for photographing the U.S. as a young person when you feel like everything has been done? Because personally, I've started to study art and photography more specifically, and I did a series of pictures in Los Angeles where I grew up. I got really good feedback on it, but every time I was told, well, the U.S. is very photogenic. So I don't know how to get over that, if it's better to experiment more, or what advice would you have?
So first, let me say that I think the first time I heard a friend say everything has been done was about 55 years ago. Photographers always feel that everything's been done, because if they could think of something that hasn't been done, they would have done it. And so I think you can't wait around thinking of something that hasn't been done. I think you should not care whether it's been done or not, and just do what interests you. And you may find that your work goes into a direction that you weren't expecting. But you're not going to get there trying to do something that hasn't been done.
Thank you so much for this amazing Q&A session. It was super interesting. I was happy to hear about process and result. I think it works super well with what was for me in the core of this project, which was about journey and destination. So I think in a way we were exactly in the same. The discussion was exactly on the where I wanted it to bring through that exhibition. So that was amazing. Thank you so much.
I want to thank all of you for coming. I appreciate it.